Sup guys? In this video, I'll be briefly going over all of the equipment that have been released after the completion of my equipment guides. I did cover all of them as they came out, but I just wanted to compile all of them into one video and add it to the playlist. This isn't going to be a standalone equipment guide, so you should still watch the guides first if you aren't familiar with how equipment works in general. If you watched all the guides and fully understood them, you should be able to come to the same conclusions as me about all of this equipment since I'm just reusing the same thought processes. But just let this serve as a confirmation that you're on the right track, or maybe you actually catch something that I overlooked. Okay, let's start with Battleship guns. First, we have the Lion gun. It's simply the best gun against light armor now, directly power creeping the 406 Mark 7 in terms of damage, due to its superior modifier against light armor and lower cooldown. Its modifiers are not superior against the other two armor types, so it's not stronger than the Mark 7 outside of light armor on a per salvo basis, but it's overall pretty irrelevant because you should only be using HE guns against light armor in almost all cases. Maybe there are weird situations where you have multiple enemies with different armor types, then it's a closer battle, but for the most part you're only using them against light, so the Lion gun is just better. Despite it being stronger though, you might not always get to use it on your strongest ship. For example, if you're using Alsace and Lion together, you might be tempted to give Lion the Lion gun, but because Alsace has to fire first to grant her damage buff to Lion, it's preferable to give Alsace the Lion gun unless you have a French Vanguard to make her buff permanent, or you're just a history LARPer. Also, if a slightly weaker ship has lower reload and need a faster cooldown to get off a last salvo, then you might also end up needing to use the Lion gun on that weaker ship. This is more about the nuances of fleet building and timing though, and not directly related to the properties of the gun. Next up, we also got the Duncan gun recently from PR9. It's pretty good actually, the first non-rainbow HE gun that is solidly an upgrade over the good old purple 406 Mark 6. It has a tiny bit less base damage, but the 20 extra firepower makes up for it, and it can be upgraded to plus 13 as well if you want. It is a stepping stone that you'll eventually look to replace, but the cost to get it to plus 13 is only a third compared to the cost of upgrading the Mark 7, and it's also a bit faster in cooldown, so I don't think it's a bad idea to fully invest in at least one copy for most players, mid or late game, but not the highest priority if you already have a Lion gun lying around. That's pretty much it for the HE guns. Moving on, the Raffaello gun came out after the guides, and it's the best gun against medium armor on a per salvo basis, with its insane damage and modifiers on an average cooldown. It's also quite accurate on its own with only 17 spread, but most of the time you're going to end up using this gun with the Admiralty fire control table anyway. Then we also have the Mecklenburg gun, which is the best gun generally against heavy armor now since the 460 is too slow for normal use. Its damage against medium is tied for second with the Soyuz gun, even on a per salvo basis. The damage of the gun itself is slightly lower, but it has 20 more firepower, which helps not only the damage of the gun itself, but also increases the damage of the barrage of the ship. Its cooldown is also considerably lower than that of many regular AP guns, so it oftentimes ends up being the best gun to use for many ships that don't have enough reload to squeeze out a final salvo before the battle ends with Raffaello gun, even against medium armor even though its ammo mods are nothing special. There is also the Kansas gun right here, which as you can see has a 30-second base cooldown. It's just the worst Yamato gun, so pretty much worthless. Now, let's move on to the fighters. The biggest game changer in this category since the guide is obviously the LA9. It just nukes medium armor, a lot harder than even BF-109G, which was already pretty damn good. It's also decent against heavy armor. Its biggest drawback is that it's quite slow. A lot of the carriers that could get 4 airstrikes with the BF-109G before are unable to do it with the LA9, but the damage is easily enough to make up for that. There are also some carriers that have enough reload to use LA9s and still pull off 4 airstrikes like Centaur and Albion, who receive enormous boosts to their medium armor damage from using these. The other new fighter is the FW-190G3. This is a fighter with exceptional anti-air performance but no surface damage. It's only used in chapters 15 and 16 support fleets for interception, so they're very low priority. They are extremely cheap to craft though for being gold equipment from the Gear Lab, so they're worth considering if you have a surplus of materials. Next up are dive bombers. The big one is the new TA-152, which is basically an aimed torpedo bomber that goes in the dive bomber slot. The only drawback is its disgustingly long cooldown. Still not as long as the Sky Raider, but pretty damn long. After adjusting for hit rate, It damage mogs all the other dive bombers against a single enemy, minus the Sky Raider against light armor. It retains the lower aviation scaling that dive bombers have, but despite that, it's able to outdamage all of the aimed torpedo bombers, minus the Ryusei Kai, when you account for the 20 extra aviation it has for being a rainbow plane. So for example, in Shinano's first slot, where you can bring any plane, the TA-152 will result in more total damage than any torpedo bomber except for Ryusei Kai, which is limited to only one copy. The long cooldown does stop it from being universally better than torpedo bombers though. I don't think I put quite enough emphasis on how long the cooldown is. Like the LA9 that I just talked about was pretty slow, but this is even slower, and the upgrade is not as big as the LA9 was. This is just my personal opinion, but I think it would have been fine if they got rid of the aviation scaling penalty for this plane, to be honest. Surely it's only a matter of time before we get a rainbow aimed torpedo bomber, and then this thing will just be collecting dust. But for now, it's the best we got, and definitely a welcomed upgrade for all dive bomber slots. Another relevant dive bomber that came out was the F4U VBF-94 Squadron. It's pretty much just an upgrade over the Suisei Kai, having a slightly lower cooldown, which is Suisei Kai's main selling point, and even doing a little damage on top. Use it like you would Suisei Kai, but just better. Now we move on to the torpedo bombers. First up is the Ryusei Kai. I added it right on top of the regular Ryusei in my own chart for easier comparison to other aimed torpedo bombers. It is functionally the same as the regular Ryusei, but the damage is a bit higher. The extra damage though makes it the highest damage per strike aimed torpedo bomber, dethroning the VIT-2 from PR7. You can only have one copy of it right now though, so try to put it on the strongest slot in the fleet, something like Hakuho or Shinano's third slot. The other one is the FW190F8, pretty much a JU87 upgrade. It's tied with the VIT-2 for the second highest damage per strike, but with a slightly lower cooldown, and the torpedoes drop closer to the target, so it's easier to use. Also, the highest damaging aimed torpedo bomber that you can have as many copies of as you want. It makes the regular Ryusei and JU87 obsolete for the most part, although if you're a progressing player and already have JU87s and Ryuseis, maybe it's not the best idea to spend the Operations Hour materials for such a minor upgrade. Saiyans naturally still have an important role as a much faster option. Alright, that's it for the planes. Now let's look at the Vanguard guns, starting with large cruiser guns. We only got the Howden Ryu gun, which is an HE gun and slightly better than the Azuma gun, but the difference is negligible. Well, it's annoying as hell that Howden Ryu can't use the Azuma gun, so you're forced to use this thing on her. And like, it's just so bad compared to Unzen gun, but I like Howden Ryu a lot, so I have no choice but to use this thing on her, since despite how bad it is, it still does splash damage, which is kinda nice in campaign, and she also gains other bonuses, so I had no choice but to plus 13 this thing, despite already having plus 13 the Azuma gun, which is pretty much the same thing, and almost never used. My god, what a waste. Alright, let's move on to heavy cruiser guns. The only new one is the Moskva gun. There's not much to say here, it's a better Hindenburg gun. It has better medium armor mod, better spread, and better raw DPS. No mysteries here. After that, there have been no relevant new light cruiser guns, so we're on to destroyer guns. First, we got a new Rainbow HE destroyer gun, which is also IJN like the first Rainbow destroyer gun. It completely eclipses the old one in damage, and despite them both being in the IJN tech tree and the Gear Lab, the old one does not upgrade into the new one. Being a destroyer enjoyer, I had 3 of the old ones at plus 13 that are now just rotting because the new gun has higher DPS at plus 10 than the old one at plus 13, and also higher firepower. Like, what are we even doing here? Light cruisers are still using the Plymouth gun from PR5, which, even after the entire class of guns were buffed by 20% damage, is still the worst Vanguard gun class in the game. Meanwhile, we're getting a gun like this for a class where half the best ships would rather use a blue gun than this thing, and a large portion of them have their damage come from barrages and torpedoes instead of guns. Can somebody please send light cruisers some help? Getting back on topic, the Mogador gun is still better against medium armor, but otherwise, I think the numbers speak for themselves. It does have a pretty big dead zone though, like if this gun locks onto a target past 55 range, it will just not reach the target before fizzling out, but I don't think it's enough of a drawback to make it worse than any other gun. Next is the Twin 127 MLE. This gun has the same mods as the Tash gun, better DPS with lower reload, and 360-degree firing angle. The only thing it compromises on is a little bit of range, but in general it should be the new best gold destroyer gun. For medium armor specifically, the Italian SAP gun is still better though. The last new destroyer gun is this twin 127 prototype, which can only be used as a secondary gun on main fleet ships. It's got HE ammo and armor mods, but it pierces one like AP ammo does apparently, so it could be good at intercepting multiple suicide ships that are stacked on top of each other. Maybe it also has some application in exercises, but I don't know about all that. The next category is torpedoes. First, we got the new Quad 610 Torpedoes, cruiser in parentheses. Like the name suggests, it can only be used on cruisers. So light cruisers get these non-homing torps while destroyers got that new gun. What a great deal. Anyway, I actually only realized now that the cruiser in the name wasn't only for show, and I don't think any cruisers are actually going to want to use these because they're not homing, and a lot of cruisers have effects tied to torpedo launch, so they probably prefer something faster. These are the torps that come with Takahashi, I think, and Takahashi herself has a barrage tied to her torpedo launch, so I don't think even she wants something this slow. Same goes for Shimanto. In general, it's a slight downgrade to the Quint 610, and the 610 can also be used on anyone, even Odin if you want, so I don't see any real use for the cruiser-only 610. After that, we also got the improved quad mags, which are just the best torps for auto, but better. It's analogous to what the Ryusei Kai is to the base Ryusei, but this one actually came first. They should have just made both this and the Ryusei Kai Rainbow. I don't know why they're so hesitant with homing torps and aim torpedo bombers, but for heavy cruiser or battleship guns, they're just shitting out rainbows left and right. The next relevant torpedo is the König-Berti torps. They're quite fast at 20 seconds base cooldown, but without sacrificing nearly as much damage as the actual fast torps we're used to seeing. They fire in a parallel pattern rather than a cone pattern, but not in a straight line like the HMS torps. I think the pattern is okay in a lot of cases, but not as good as homing torps. They're serviceable if you're trying to trigger skills on torpedo launch like with König-Berti herself, William D. Porter, Shimanto, etc. The final relevant neat torpedo is the new French 55510. Its mods are reversed from what we're used to, dealing 130% to light armor and 80% to heavy. Since it's homing and its DPS is actually quite high, exceeding that of the quad mags against light and medium, it should on paper be pretty good even on auto in most situations, but the issue is that the speed of its torpedoes are faster, which means the tracking ability is weaker, so it doesn't have quite the same consistency as the quad mags when it comes to landing hits. They're still really good though, and have the same low cooldown as the König-Berti torps, so you can use them on any ship that would enjoy the König-Berti torps against non-heavy enemies, or use them if you're only fighting against light armor where they should outperform quad mags. Lastly, we have a new Rainbow submarine torpedo. It's a Rainbow G7E, meaning it's homing and generally easier to use than the other older Rainbow submarine torpedo, the Type 95 Kai. It's definitely far from optimal in every situation though, since it has much lower range and is weaker on each torpedo, so there are still plenty of situations where the Type 95 could outperform it. But in general, the G7E is much easier to use, and if you don't want to dig too much into submarines, which is the mood I'm in right now, then just make G7Es and use pressure hulls on all your subs and be done with it. Okay, that should be it for all of the relevant stuff that was released after I finished the existing equipment guides. If you learned about equipment from my guides, I want to know if you came to the same conclusions as me for all these equipments, or if there was something that you were unsure of that got cleared up from this video. There's still one more thing that I have yet to cover, which is auxiliaries, which I was too lazy to do previously, because there are so many of them with unique effects, but I think I figured out a good approach, so it will come eventually. With that being said, thanks for watching and see you in the next one.